Hi, good afternoon and welcome to Fairlane, the historic home of Henry and Clara Ford. I'm Mark Kepner, the Vice President of Historic Resources with the Historic Florida Estates, and I'm joined today with Tony Carsonas of Historic Surfaces LLC. We're very, very excited to share with you and continue this wonderful Facebook Live series about the restoration and reimagination of Fairlane and the work we're doing here in Dearborn, Michigan. Tony, who's been my partner on this and has been with us now for a couple of years, has been really immersed in this project as much as I have about learning what has happened here, how this estate has transformed over the years, but more importantly, to learn what exactly this home looked like back in 1915, 1916 when the Fords moved in, so we could be authentic in our recreation and restoration work. So Tony, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Talking about the wonderful work you've been doing. So now you've been here for quite a little while, off and on, a lot of it with the physical work with you and your team, but also joining me earlier on doing studies.
Right.
You want to talk a little bit about what those studies meant and what we did?
Well, the studies really work hand in hand with obviously a lot of the research that you guys have carried out. And the research that we're doing is to try to find out the original appearance of spaces. How we do that is kind of think of it as we're archaeologists looking at what is actually here within the house. Our primary way of trying to find out information about original historic colors is what we call paint microscopy or sampling. And what we'll do is we'll extract little samples, look at them under a microscope, and with all the layering sequences, try to figure out what it is we're trying to look for as far as the original colors and finishes that could have been here. It allows us to also look not only for original colors, but also signs of decoration, everything from glazing to stenciling, metallic finishes. So that's kind of like the first phase. Second phase is really then doing what we call exposure windows, which is actually to carefully remove paint and look at signs of decoration or earlier colors. And we do that by carefully removing all the overpaint layers to get back to those early historic surfaces. And that really what gives us the foundation of understanding of how some of the spaces originally appeared.
And from my perspective, those exposure windows, that research, really are the things that get people excited because it allows you a little glimpse into what was once here, knowing where we're going to be taking these rooms back to. Before we talk about the room that we're actually in right now, the living room, I want to talk about the music room. And I know you can't see that right now, but you have to trust me on this. This was a room that was painted much like the living room. In about 1940, Clara Ford had it painted what was called a putty color. And when you see this beautiful decorative woodwork that was all painted over, you might be a little shocked. But to be honest, for the last 50 years, nobody really has seen the natural wood and the original woodwork. But Tony and his team have spent countless hours, hundreds and thousands of hours, removing all that paint and actually taking these rooms back to it. But maybe just briefly about what the music room journey experience kind of meant to you and your team and how you got from A to B.
Yeah, so it was obviously a pretty substantial project, and I think it's because of two things. Number one, there were a lot of layers of paint that we had to remove, but then also it's just the sheer size of the space. I think it's somewhere close to 25 by 55 feet, floor to ceiling woodwork with articulated moldings, ornament, everything, any kind of surface you could imagine that had to be stripped, we had to deal with. So it brings up kind of what is really the key with paint stripping on wood surfaces, and it's all about the dwell time, allowing the stripper to do the work for you. But it's one thing to be able to soften all the paint surfaces, it's another thing to be able to clear and remove all that paint once it's become softened. And it's a matter of just being able to carefully and continually clear it so you're not contaminating the cleaned areas around you. And that's where the real time comes in, is that continual process of removing more and more.
Is that a mistake that some people make by kind of looking at a space and maybe that the pie is a little too big, that they want to do it all at once, and so they actually put the stripper on and they can't even get to that next point before the stripper.
All of us want to work out a faster way of doing things. It's just sometimes there's just no way around it. It's just simply a matter of it's just the time is what the time is, and it's allowing the stripper to do the work, because it is what, from my experience, most people who work with paint strippers, they don't want to let the stripper to kind of take the time to do what it's supposed to do and they see it, they're anxious to get it stripped, and they're like, all right, it started to work, I'm gonna start scraping
Right.
it off. But they're not really allowing it to do what it's meant to do. And that's where testing comes in place too, where before we attack the room, we tried 4 to 5 different strippers, we tried different dwell times, and then we worked through the process of what seemed to work in the best way for that particular case. Because I have to tell you, in this room that we're in now, in the living room, we're dealing with removing paint in a very similar fashion, but we're finding certain things work better here than worked in the other room.
Well, and without a doubt, patience is key too. One thing I will tell you, Tony and his team, everybody that works on this project, patience I've noticed, and sometimes it's not my strong point, but you really have to have patience, again, to let the products do what they're meant to be done, but also realize by rushing things, you can actually do more damage. Now, as you mentioned, we're now in the living room. This is a room, again, that was painted over, as I mentioned, and this beautiful walnut has not seen the light of day since 1940. And so for you all, I imagine it's pretty exciting. You are the ones taking it back to what it was. And we're in this process right now of some surfaces with paint, some of it with immediately just coming off, some that we did earlier on with an exposure window and a finish. So you kind of have this great variety right now to see the process.
Yeah, I mean, this is really where people get really excited to be able to see the process. And as you mentioned, you can't see the music room, but to see the way it looks now with the finishes. And then this is in process where you see the wood is exposed, but there's still areas that are a little rough. It requires prep work. We have to do a little final clearing. There's some sanding we're gonna have to do in preparation for the application of the finishes. We're using a lot of very traditional type finishes, like just raw oil stain with traditional oil varnishes that we're hand brushing. So as Mark mentioned, the area to the left of us on the fireplace was actually our initial mock-up, and that was to get kind of everybody on board with the potential changes and what it could look like. And it's kind of a really important part of the process because it also allows us to work through the motions of what's going to work and what doesn't, and so we can refine also the procedures that we use.
For a lot of people too, these exposure windows, the mock-ups, it also prepares them for the change that's going to happen, because these changes are dramatic. In some rooms maybe not as much, but especially these formal rooms, these are dramatic changes, and sometimes people do need to be prepared to understand. I mean, because they are beautiful, but they're different.
Yeah, because we're going from rooms that were painted lemon yellow white to now having raw woodwork, which is going to dramatically change the character of the space.
Now, after you do the paint removal and you have these wonderful surfaces and you can start seeing the grain, the original wood grain and all that beauty, what finish do you put on at the end of this to help not only bring that richness up, but to protect the wood surface?
Well, as with most things, we're trying to go back what was originally used, and we know that the original finishes here were a traditional oil type varnish, and so we're going back to using that kind of system. We're even going to the point of actually hand brushing it so we can really accurately emulate the look and that feel, because there's something about using natural oil finishes versus a lot of the modern synthetic ones where it just feels different. And not to say that a lot of the modern products aren't good, but it's just its application. And if we're trying to emulate a specific feel and look, one of the easier things that we can do to help out our case is actually to go back and using those similar type of materials.
So, excuse me, in this room, you know, we still have a lot of work to be done. There's stenciling that needs to be put back. Luckily, that is still underneath all those layers of paint, glazings and ceilings. But this room, in the short term, will be a rich, dark, very, very warm feeling room. And that's quite exciting. And as I said, people have not seen this room since 1940 the way it was meant to be. So we're working very hard to get there. The real other reason we're talking about paint removal and stripping is that we actually have a workshop coming up. So if you want to learn more with Tony and his team about the processes that we've learned here, but also processes that were to be appropriate to maybe work that you're doing at your own house or in your job, we have our January 27th on Saturday from 1 to 4 here at Fairlane. And what's wonderful about these workshops, one, you get to learn from our artisans and our talented craftspeople, but two, you physically get to be in the space to see the work. and have that really very VIP special insight into what we're doing here. So again, Tony, thank you for joining us, and I want to thank you and your team for the wonderful work they've been doing.
Our pleasure.
We could not be doing this without you and all the artisans and tradespeople that we have engaged on this. And thank you for joining us, and stay tuned to the next Facebook Live here at Fairlane.